Prophecies and curses are always important in Shakespeare's plays. Any prediction that's made or doom that's laid on a person rarely ever goes unfulfilled. But in Julius Caesar, we see prophecies and portents and warning signs of what's about to happen to a crazy extent. And this is because not only did Shakespeare himself like prophecies and portents as plot devices, but his actual sources, Plutarch being one of them, said that these things happened. Signs and prophecies were very important to the ancient Romans, which is something that they inherited from the Greeks, whose culture they tried to emulate in a lot of ways. It was so important that there was an official priest called the augur, whose job it was to practice augury, which was a practice sort of like fortune-telling. The augur would interpret omens and signs and try to figure out what the will of the gods was for the people. They did this through a number of methods, like examining the entrails of animals and whatnot, but the main method was by studying the flights and other habits of birds, and this was called taking the auspices. We see an example of this fortune-telling by way of birds near the end of the play. Right before the final battle at Philippi, Cassius is starting to feel that things might not work out so well for them. As you're about to see, Cassius isn't typically the type of person to put much stock in the supernatural, or at least in augury. He's talking to Messala, another soldier, and says that he's been seeing things that are persuading him to change his mind about that. He says, "You know that I held Epicurus strong in his opinion. Now I change my mind, and partly credit things that do presage. Coming from Sardis, on our former ensign 2 mighty eagles fell, and there they perched, gorging and feeding from our soldiers' hands, who to Philippi here consorted us. This morning are they fled away and gone, and in their steads do ravens, crows, and kites fly over our heads and downward look on us, as we were sickly prey. Their shadows seem a canopy most fatal, under which our army lies, ready to give up the ghost." Messala says, "Believe not so," and Cassius responds, I but believe it partly, for I am fresh of spirit and resolved to meet all perils very constantly." So these 2 eagles that have landed on the army's ensign, which is a flag or a battle standard, and traveled with them until the battle was about to begin, have now left, and carrion birds have taken their place, and the eagles have hightailed it out of there. This is a bad sign. Eagles especially were paid close attention to in Greek culture because of the close relationship they were thought to have had with Zeus. So the augurs held tremendous power in Rome. Everyone took what they said seriously, even if a few of them might have had their private doubts like Cassius, and wars could be declared or postponed, elections could be overturned on the word of the augur. This was a culture that 100% believed that the gods revealed their intentions and desires to them through means such as these, and to ignore them would be to subject oneself to the distrust and scorn of the Roman people, even if things happened to turn out all right. Which brings us to an interesting point. Commanders and senators and public officials were expected to take the auspices seriously, but doing this, in fact, sometimes led to disaster. A perfect example of this is in the Iliad by Homer. Twice, characters are led on by the gods to some action that results in disaster. Zeus sends a dream to the Greek king Agamemnon and says that he should have his men attack Troy tomorrow, that it'll be an easy victory, when Zeus knows all along that this won't happen. He wants the Greeks to attack because he wants them to be slaughtered to fulfill a promise he'd made to another god. Then we see Hector, the great defender of Troy, who we're told is very pious, always doing what the gods command, tricked by one of them into waiting outside of the gates of Troy to face Achilles. The god takes the form of his brother so that he thinks he has backup, and then when Achilles shows up, it vanishes into thin air and Hector knows that he's been tricked. The Greek gods, and by extension the Roman gods, and the means by which they communicated with mortals, were notoriously unreliable. And not surprisingly, this was something that the early Christian writers attacked in order to debunk paganism. Augustine of Hippo, who did a lot of work defending Christianity from unfair accusations that were being made against it, spent the first couple books in his work The City of God reviewing Roman history and showing how the gods that they worshipped had never actually helped them. But to bring this conversation back to Julius Caesar, the first portent we get is from the soothsayer who intercepts Caesar during his triumph. he starts screaming out to him, "Beware the Ides of March!" And he says this over and over again until Caesar takes notice and stops the whole procession so that he can hear. The soothsayer again says, "Beware the Ides of March," which in common parlance is March 15th. And Caesar says, "He is a dreamer. Let us leave him." And they walk away without paying the old man any more attention. Now, to Shakespeare's Protestant Elizabethan audience, that sentence should have immediately raised a red flag. In the book of Genesis, we learn about Joseph, who more than once had dreams that predicted the future, and he was also a great interpreter of dreams. When he told his brothers that he had a dream where they were all basically paying obedience to him and serving him, his brothers got angry and decided they were going to do away with him. And while they were plotting this, whenever they would see him coming towards them, they would sneer and say, "Here comes the dreamer." But of course, everything that Joseph dreamed came true. And what the soothsayer in the play warns comes true as well, but Caesar brushes him off just like Joseph's brothers brushed off his prophetic dreams. This was a rather famous story from the Bible, and Shakespeare's audience would have been familiar with it. So that's Caesar's first mistake, his arrogance at shrugging off signs of impending disaster and thinking that he's untouchable. He makes plenty more mistakes before the Ides of March come. Things start to happen that are much more drastic than the ramblings of a soothsayer. Things that a man like Caesar, who's grown up in Roman culture and has a respect for portents and signs, shouldn't ignore like he does. The night before he's assassinated, the whole city seems to be spiraling out of control in a sort of supernatural maelstrom. Casca, one of the conspirators, is wandering around the streets with his sword drawn, scared out of his wits at the things he's seen, and he runs into Cicero, who we'll talk more about in a later video. Cicero asks him what's wrong, and Casca, sword trembling in his hand, basically says, "I've seen some things before, I've experienced some crazy weather, but never till tonight, never till now did I go through a tempest dropping fire. Either there is a civil strife in heaven, or else the world, too saucy with the gods, incenses them to send destruction." And Cicero says, "Why, saw you anything more wonderful?" And Casca responds, "A common slave, you know him well by sight, held up his left hand, which did flame and burn like 20 torches joined, and yet his hand, not sensible of fire, remained unscorched. Besides, I had not since put up my sword. Against the Capitol I met a lion, who glared upon me, and went surly by without annoying me. And there were drawn upon a heap 100 ghastly women, transformed with their fear, who swore they saw men, all in fire, walk up and down the streets. And yesterday the bird of night did sit even at noonday upon the marketplace, hooting and shrieking. When these prodigies do so conjointly meet, let not men say, These are their reasons, they are natural, for I believe they are portentous things unto the climate that they point upon." And Cicero responds, "Indeed, it is a strange disposed time, but men may construe things after their fashion, clean from the purpose of the things themselves." So we have a meteor shower, men walking around who appear to be on fire but aren't in any pain, a lion wandering around in the city, and an owl in the middle of the day hooting and shrieking. Now these are all very alarming, unnatural things. But what Cicero says in response is very wise and very important, because this is what the action of the whole play turns on. Men may construe things after their fashion, clean from the purpose of the things themselves. It's this presumption, this rationalizing, that leads to Caesar's death. On that same night, Caesar's wife Calpurnia has a nightmare that she fears is going to come true. And the next morning, as he's getting dressed and getting ready to leave and go to the Senate, she begs him to stay at home. And she repeats what she's been hearing in the streets as well, and there's a lot of overlap here with what Casca says he saw. She says, "Caesar, I never stood on ceremonies, yet now they fright me. There is one within, besides the things that we have heard and seen, recounts most horrid sights seen by the watch. A lioness hath whelped in the streets, and graves have yawned and yielded up their dead. Fierce fiery warriors fight upon the clouds, in ranks and squadrons in right form of war, which drizzled blood upon the Capitol. The noise of battle hurtled in the air, Horses did neigh, and dying men did groan, and ghosts did shriek and squeal about the streets. O Caesar, these things are beyond all use, and I do fear them. And Caesar responds, What can be avoided whose end is purposed by the mighty gods? Yet Caesar shall go forth, for these predictions are to the world in general as to Caesar. Calpurnia's answer is that when beggars die there are no comets seen, the heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes. Now the portents have become even more alarming. The dead are rising from their tombs, blood is raining down from the sky, and this is all really apocalyptic Book of Revelation stuff happening right here. Literally. But Caesar is sort of flippant about it. Once again he makes it clear that he's not afraid of death, and then points out that those signs could be intended for anybody. And he's right. Calpurnia's response that the heavens only acknowledge the highborn and the mighty men is calculated to stroke his ego, but he's still reluctant to admit that he feels afraid of these portents, although he does send a servant to the augurs finally to ask for advice. And when the servant comes back, he says this. Caesar asks him, What say the augurs? And the servant says, They would not have you to stir forth today. Plucking the entrails of an offering forth, they could not find a heart within the beast. And Caesar responds, The gods do this in shame of cowardice. Caesar should be a beast without a heart if he should stay at home today for fear. No, Caesar shall not. Danger knows full well that Caesar is more dangerous than he. We are 2 lions littered in one day, and I the elder and more terrible, and Caesar shall go forth. So, putting all of his superinflated, bombastic ego aside for a minute, we see that he's made the very mistake that Cicero warned about. He's twisting the auspices, which are very vague to begin with, to fit the interpretation that he thinks. The augurs don't think it's a good sign, but he convinces himself that the gods are telling him to do what he really wants to do anyway. Then he does the same thing again. Decius Brutus, who's another one of the conspirators, but not the main Brutus that we've been talking about, comes to pick Caesar up so that they can get him to the capital and kill him. And at first, Caesar says that he's going to stay home that day after all, and it's because of his wife's dream. Then we finally get to hear what this dream was. Calpurnia here, my wife, stays me at home. She dreamt tonight she saw my statue, which, like a fountain with 100 spouts, did run pure blood, and many lusty Romans came smiling, and did bathe their hands in it. And these does she apply for warnings and portents, and evils imminent, and on her knee hath begged that I will stay at home today. And Decius Brutus responds, This dream is all misinterpreted. It was a vision fair and fortunate. Your statue, spouting blood in many pipes, in which so many smiling Romans bathed, signifies that from you great Rome shall suck reviving blood, and that great men shall press for tinctures, stains, relics, and recognizance. This, by Calpurnia's dream, is signified. So you would have to be crazy to think that dream was a sign of good things to come. But Decius Brutus is able to turn the whole thing around, and his interpretation convinces Caesar, and he basically laughs and says, Ha ha ha, see how foolish you were, Calpurnia. I can't believe you had me convinced that something bad was about to happen. But it's almost understandable. Especially when it comes to vague predictions and signs, we tend to fix our own meanings to them. This was a problem that Macbeth had as well, if you remember. The Weird Sisters gave him a few things that basically served as a nudge, and he ran with what they gave him and used it to justify doing things that he wanted to do anyway. But it's exactly the fact that these sorts of things are so malleable to interpretation that give them such an appeal. Think about all of the things even today that play off of that same desire of ours to hear what we want to hear. We've got fortune cookies that are usually vague. Sometimes they don't always hit the mark, but usually you can make them meaningful to you somehow. It's over there right now, but the best fortune cookie I ever got was actually one that was pretty plain, and it said, "A nice cake is waiting for you." So that one wasn't too vague, but most of them are. And then we've also got daily horoscopes in the newspapers that are intentionally so vague that it would be hard not to be able to read them and make them relate somehow to what's going on in your life. I've got yesterday's here with me. I'll just for an example, read you one of the things it says. It says, If you don't give in until you get what you want, you will have no regrets. Don't let uncertainty dictate your actions. Take hold of every opportunity in the upcoming year, and don't let anger or disappointment slow you down. Love and romance will be of enormous benefit. So, that's pretty vague. Not exactly super helpful. But we like reading things like that. And, of course, for Caesar, this has much deadlier consequences than it usually tends to have for us. He ignores the soothsayer's plain warning, makes up his own interpretation of the augure's auspices, and allows himself to be persuaded by Decius Brutus that what was clearly an unfavorable dream was in fact a sign of good things to come. And of course, a few hours later, Calpurnia's dream is coming true in the most literal sense possible. The conspirators surround Caesar, stab him 33 times, and then bend down and dip their hands and swords in the pool of blood for theatrical effects.